It's Ajay.
Hello.
Hey, Zach.
Hello.
Okay, I think we can get started. I just got a message from Samir that him and Pritesh will not be able to join today. Okay, I think we have a few agenda items, but Ivan, do you have anything you want to add to the agenda, or?
Yeah, just some questions around the plugin development. You guys maybe saw some of my messages on Slack regarding just behavior of the verification functionality, the capability. I have some specific questions around being able to implement, for example, my own timestamping, as well as how to pass in, vendor specific plugin attributes that I can verify separately from the notation critical attributes.
Okay, so I saw your questions. I actually saw that Pritesh and Shiwei were replying to those. Is there anything maybe more kind of concrete questions that you have, and we'll see whether I can answer or Sajid can answer those? Because we don't have the engineers today on the call. Normally the Monday call is better if you have more technical questions.
Yeah, I think it's definitely some more technical questions around is the notation client going to support RFC 3161 timestamping in the case that the plugin doesn't want to do that external timestamping, and then just questions around technical questions around the verification part of the plugin interface. Like, for example, if I have vendor specific attributes that I want to be able to pass in and then validate, and then as part of the verification.
My understanding
I will capture. Yeah, go
sorry.
ahead, Sajid.
No, my understanding is that timestamping is planned for the client. I think it's just a matter of timing at this point in time. I don't know whether there's an issue tracking timestamping. To maybe we can confirm that it's in a milestone. I don't think it's in milestone 1.0, but it's probably going to be 1.1. The second one about vendor attributes for the plugin, this should be supported, and I think this is why we introduced the concept of the envelope plugin. And your questions were definitely along the right track from what we had thought about when the plugin spec was written. To Toddy's point, I would say let's at least have another issue and talk about describing, add more description on how to implement an envelope into the specification if we want to, so that we can at least answer these questions and it has some recorded information along the project, right? If somebody else is coming along to implement, they also benefit without having to ask again and going through this discovery exercise. Because
exactly.
To be fair, I think I understand that people who implemented the spec were also the ones writing the spec. And so it's kind of some assumptions were made that were not captured. And that's fair.
Yeah.
To probably call out that this is missing.
Yeah, exactly. Overall improving the developer experience, those that are coming in this that haven't been, influencing or have, in-depth knowledge of the spec.
Right.
Yeah.
And would you be able to open an issue so that we can address the questions there and add comments along the spec and maybe attach PRs to that issue also?
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Which project should I do that in, or in this?
Toddy, for now we can use the Notary project itself, right? That's where the plugin spec is.
Yeah, that's where the plugin spec is. So
Okay.
yeah, Notary project. And we will need to migrate those issues once.
Okay. We can transfer it once the.
Yeah. The other option
specific.
is that I was thinking right now is whether we can should add them to the Notary project dev as a documentation items.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, because we need to document this anyways as part of the plugin development. So maybe actually if you can open them in notaryproject.dev as a documentation items, and we will keep them in mind for the specification also. Will that work, Ivan?
Yeah, that'll work.
Ivan, I'll probably be taking on the docs issue, so I'll be responding to those, and we can have an ongoing conversation about what you'd like to see in the docs from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think, Zach, didn't we have already an item for kind of plugin development guidelines? We had something.
We had the secure development, which was sort of an offshoot of the security audit.
Okay, yeah.
That's what we have now. I think there's discussion, or at least sort of a guide. There's at least been discussions around, do we just have a plain old developers plugin guide that's not necessarily secure, but guidelines around creating plugins? I'm fine with putting it in either place.
Yeah, okay. I just see in the agenda that we have that one. Okay. Does that help, Ivan?
Yeah, so just to confirm, I'm going to open up as a Notary project / Notary project, and then just open up an issue and refer to, I forget which.
No, I'll send you the link actually. Notary project / Notary project dev.
.dev.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's the documentation site.
There it is. Got it. I just saw it. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, great. That's all I have.
Okay. Just sending the link. Make sure I'll add it to the notes also. Okay, so let me share my screen about the other items, agenda items that we have. I'm not sure how much we can actually drive those today without Samir and Pritesh, but we can eventually look at that. And Zach, I will add your item. I believe you pinged me privately, wanted to discuss how the docs will look like, right?
Yeah, you can share that link. It's just a public preview link. If we can talk about that while we're together, that'd be great.
Do you want to start from those, and then we can look at the other ones that?
Yeah, I'm ready to talk about it now. I don't want to overwrite anybody, or I don't want to overtake the meeting unless everyone's okay with talking about this first.
I'm okay starting with this.
Cool. So long story short, this is an offshoot of the discussion we were having at the community call 1 week ago with Rosaline around the information architecture, essentially the doc site. And one of the topics of discussion that came out of her proposals were, should we organize the content that's dedicated to notation in its own directory? So part of the concern that at least I raised, or one of the things that needed to be discussed, was most of the content on the doc site was based on notation. So there was not many pieces of content that were abstracted from notation. And so I just wanted to show you all what it would look like. There's some things that we... Go ahead, Toddy.
I have it shared, right? You can see my screen.
Yes, this is exactly it.
Do you want to walk us through that?
Sure. So I think what you have displayed right now, Toddy, I would like this, or at least the table of contents on the left and like everything under /docs, like so you're the previous page. I'd want basically the notation element expanded in the table of contents to sort of give people a smoother glide path into using notation. It's kind of hard. Essentially, where I'm running into is we have to convey the fact, if we do this refactor, that in order to, at the current moment, in order to sign artifacts with notary signatures, you have to use notation for the time being. So that would be a problem to solve. So I fully acknowledge that. But what you have right here is there's the first element in the table of contents is the project overview. That is unchanged. I didn't really do much content changes. It was mainly just reorganization. And that is just notary, that's general notary project information. Second entry is notation. You're starting off with the top level element, that's the quick start. We can add more quick starts at that top level. I think those are important enough to stick there. And then from there, everything falls out. Installation guides, tutorials, how-to guides, notation specific concepts, and then the reference, so the CLI reference. All of that is existing content that I've just moved underneath this directory. And then we pop back up a level. There's a concepts directory at the notary level. And there's one element there underneath concepts. We could probably put more in there. And then troubleshooting and frequently asked questions, that's where I was a little divided. A lot of the content is solving problems. So the frequently asked questions has more abstracted content, and I think it would be fine there. Troubleshooting, most of it ends up using notation, but it's still general troubleshooting questions that one may have in a future state where you're using a different client or a different method for signing artifacts. So, we could have a top level one that just says, hey, here's an example of how to do it in notation, but you could do it via other means. But yeah, again, these are larger discussions that we can have, and nothing is permanent. We can always change it. But I wanted you all to take a look at this and see, do you think this looks good? Do you think that this makes more sense than the current layout? Because a lot of Rosalind's feedback we could take in the Google Doc that she did. This is sort of just more of a visualization plus some minor changes to her layout idea.
And I'm just opening the current kind of information architecture that we currently have, which in essence, I think you took those pieces, right, and put them under notation, right, something like this.
Yeah, what you see right now on the main site, I just reorganized that existing content. It's nothing net new added.
Yeah. I don't know, any thoughts, Sajay? And I don't know whether you looked at the documentation and whether that is actually something that you are looking at as a plugin development. The first thing that actually comes to my mind is like, where is kind of the developer guides?
Yeah, I think that would help. Definitely, I think we should start tracking that from. I know there's plenty of examples, but I wouldn't say we have to go all out and do like a tutorial, but just point out the templates and then just some instructions on how to do like the different signature types, right? Different envelope types.
This is plugin development, or this is other development?
We have two types. Well, one is the plugin one.
Plugin development.
Yeah, but which most probably will be under kind of notation because it's a notation plugin. But I can see also development guides for folks who want to develop tools that are not notation that produce the signatures
or verification, right? The downstream verification.
Yes, exactly. How do you verify that signature,
So this
which
would
is
be
independent from notation.
right. So you would want so in addition to a notation plugin development guide, you would also want a development guide at, say, the root level, or a directory that's development guides at the root level for creating peers to notation, correct?
That's what I would imagine, because as I said, so we have not only creating peers to notation, it's more verification of things, which I for example, may not be able to use notation for verification. I need to understand how can I verify the signature without using notation. Maybe because I cannot use a CLI, which is the notation CLI, or maybe because I do not actually develop in Go and I cannot use the notation libraries. So I need to figure out how can I verify a signature that notation created and sign the image with, but I need to verify it somewhere else. Sajay, you have your hand up. Sorry, Zach. Sajay.
Yeah, go ahead, Sajay.
Yeah, sorry, where do you see the specs going in this? Because I think it's kind of important.
That's where I'm alluding to, right? Where the specs are going with this kind of development resources. So I see them more on a higher level above notation, because I don't care about notation.
Yeah, because in sites like CNAB.io, it's like the first big point in the page, right? Like as soon as you go there, you know where to find the specs, even though it points to a GitHub repository, and kind of takes you from there.
What we were looking the other day, right? Let me just open that. We were using. That's what you mean, the spec.
Yeah.
So you all are fine with keeping the spec in its own GitHub repo or in the Notary project repo and having a link to it from docs. You don't want to relocate the specs to doc pages, right?
No, I don't think I've ever thought of it that way.
Okay.
But we are not keeping the Notary project repo. I think we are reaching agreement that Notary project repo will be retired or archived, and we will change it. We'll move the specs either in a new specifications repo or depending if they are notation related in the notation CLI repo. I don't think we reached that agreement, but I think Notary project as a repo will be retired. So we should not.
Sure, but it would exist in this. The specs would still exist in a separate GitHub repo that would be maintained by the Notary team, and then the docs themselves would just link to that repo when it comes to specs.
Yes.
But the way, go ahead, Sajay.
No, I think rewriting the specs in a doc form is not something that we have thought about or might even have the bandwidth for. So the other question I have for you, Toddy, is why have we considered the option of renaming the Notary project repo just for the thing, or do we want to actually retire it? But to Zach's question, there will be a repository with specs, right?
I don't think we can rename it. That's the problem.
Okay, sounds good. We'll take that separately.
Yeah, I don't think we can rename it. But coming back to what you just mentioned and what Zach is asking, I agree that we should not rewrite the spec in a documentation format. But I think we should have in the documentation examples how to interpret certain things that are written in the spec.
Like code samples?
Like, for example, the questions that Ivan is asking. Either we need to include those in the specs and ref the specs, and actually what you just mentioned, still having examples how this will be implemented and what needs to be done to be verified. That is something that actually we need to add as documentation somewhere. I have another example from another team that I'm working with where there was the thumbprint annotation that needs to be created which is not clearly defined in the spec, how it needs to be done and what this annotation needs to have inside. And maybe that is something that we can add in the spec, but how to obtain those term trees, that is something that maybe we can add examples in the documentation for people who want to actually use the specs.
Right. That was going to be my follow-up question to the discussion we were having maybe a couple of minutes ago around, you were saying verification, where you're not necessarily, we're doing stuff beyond what notation currently does.
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming that the developer guide is not just for someone creating a new CLI or application-based tool. This could also be for, I don't know, a team that's just trying to integrate verification of signatures directly into their application.
Exactly.
And okay, and so that would be code samples in another language or in multiple languages that would adhere to the spec and just showing examples of how to do that, right?
By the way, question, Ivan, are you using Go language as a development for development?
Yes, I've been primarily Golang, to develop the Venafi plugin.
Okay, yeah, because we have a team in Microsoft that actually uses .NET.
I saw you change that for the for the Azure Keep All one. I noticed that a change.
So and they cannot use any of the libraries that we provide in notation, so they need to go and implement everything based on the spec, right?
Yeah, I guess my feedback is I've done plugin development before with other projects, and the one thing is obviously to have the spec, and one thing to have like the implementation best practices and guidelines, because the implementing the signature raw capability makes sense, but when you talk about envelope, it's just it seems very nebulous, right? So, and whether that means either writing a best practices guide or going back to the spec and making it easier to read, right? Those are two potentially two different outcomes. You don't necessarily need to write more documentation, but just improve on the spec.
And Toddy,
those are kind of go ahead, Zach.
I was just saying, Toddy, if you agree with that, I mean, I'm happy to help on the direct spec updating perspective. Not that I have deep subject matter experts in implementing the spec, but I'm happy to lend writing experience and clarity to things within the spec as well, and not making it part of the documentation.
And I think there are two parts, at least that's what I hear Ivan saying. So you have the spec and you have best practices for implementers of the spec, which I think the best practices will be a documentation item.
Because some people will be like, what signature capability do I want? Do I want just raw signatures? And then if I move to envelopes, what about signature compatibility and discoverability? Right, there's a lot of implications, right, for developers, especially for as these signatures and artifacts age, right, and they get stuffed into repositories, right. These are, I think, important considerations.
Okay, as a developer and someone looking for this content, would it be confusing to have the developer best practices on implementing the spec in the docs, but the specs themselves being in a separate GitHub repo? Or would you expect them to be all in the same location?
Good question. I mean, I think as long as they reference each other in the same location seems fine. I'm trying to think of an example where that happened, where it was separate, but I'm trying to think of the Hashi examples, but
we still can refer to the spec from the best practices, right? So even if you have it in a GitHub repo.
Sure, it's more of a findability question, meaning like, as a developer, do you start poking around a GitHub repo first and you start reading the spec? And unless, what's the easiest way to kick them over to a best practice? Is it cross-linking it to the docs, or like, if it's not sitting there in the GitHub repo, is it not going to be found by many developers because they're not necessarily looking to be kicked to a separate location?
Yeah, I mean, inside, I'm not sure if you want to continue on this. Not sure the agenda wise, but what's inside my brain when it comes to development is I always monkey see, monkey do. I look for references, and of course I use the spec. But it's really helpful when there's existing code. Like for example, when I started doing the Identify plugin development, I referenced the original Golang Azure Key Vault implementation. But I guess when it came to when I was looking for the signature envelope capability, I'm like, there's no references. Is no one implementing it? And then I have to go actually into the notation Go core libraries to pull out how to implement this. So that's maybe Zach. I'm not sure if that made sense in terms of what I would look for first, but I'm looking for references. Then I'm going to look at the spec, right? What needs to be added? How easy is it to add? Like, for example, timestamping, or if I want to pass in my vendor-specific attributes for verification that no other plugin should be responsible for. How do I do that?
Sure.
So,
I'm nodding my head. I'm nodding my head over here. This is really good feedback. So thank you for sharing that. Would it be helpful if separately, and again, I'm not volunteering this, I'm just spitballing ideas, if distinct from the Key Vault implementation, there was just a sample implementation that was not intentionally production ready, but like a sample app that you could reference in whether it's Go or .NET or whatever that implements the different parts of the spec that you could reference and kick the tires with, and then use to implement your own tool or integration to your own application. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and in fact, for the signature envelope one, I ended up going into the library because I know there's a bunch of mocked plugins that were created for Golang, so that really helped. I just had to dig for it, right? It wasn't, to your point, findability, and just it was hard to find it. But that would definitely, really improve the learning curve.
Okay. And based on what you know about yourself and your peers, if that was implemented in Go, would that be something that's easy to learn from? Or do you feel like there's another language that would be easier to pick up the concepts from?
I think they're all going to be the same once you're Golang, your Rust, your C#, your Python. I mean,
okay, so you reflect the idea, there's no language preference at this level. If you're implementing this, you should be able to pick up any ones that you mentioned to understand the concepts and to map it to whatever your specific use case is.
Yeah, I think that was the overall goal of notation, was to be language agnostic, right? Here's a spec, you could implement it in any language.
Cool.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sajay has his hand up. Sorry, folks.
Sorry, that's legacy hand.
Oh, you didn't lower. Okay, so Sajay, you're okay. So, coming back to, I think that's actually great feedback, Ivan, about this. We need, maybe Zach, if you can get some proposal how we can do that, and where it will fall into information architecture on the side, that will be good.
Okay, so just to reflect that, this is specifically the two pieces of developer content that we were talking about. The plugin developer guide specifically for notation, I think that's a little more obvious. And the secondary being the general developer documentation around implementation of spec best practices, cross-linking to the spec, and then also linking from the spec over to development best practices and possibly a sample application that implements the spec. Is that what you were talking about?
Yes, I think that's what we identified so far. There may be more in the future, but at least for now, those things will be good to have place documented. Okay, anything else around this? Okay, We can move to the other topics. So we talk about Ivan, Zach's, Sajay, your PR. I added it to the agenda. I believe the question is how we can move that forward.
Yeah. I want to bring it up so that at least if I can make a case, we have been trying to present this and get approval of this PR for the past X weeks. And if needed, I would like to show that the maintainers are definitely not being active on the PR. But if we can get some feedback from maintainers, that would be good. So at least to keep a running record of this. This is kind of why I'm coming in every call and making sure I put this on the agenda.
Yeah, I understand that. I am not sure. I chatted about this with Sabir at some point of time. He said that he will ask Milind and Yas to look at this PR. I have not seen any comments, but honestly, I haven't checked in the last couple of days. Is there at least any comments there, or?
Yeah, no, I haven't seen much, and neither has Justin or Steve also commented on it. So, and this is on the Notary, the old CLI project. So it's getting, we've been waiting.
It's only 3 of us. Actually, right. Milind commented.
Right. Yeah, but his comment was more in terms of notation specifications, which is not this project, right? So, and he kind of like at least silent, like subtly thumbs up the response I had given him. So,
yeah, I think some of those things are kind of really confusing, right? And I believe that, and there is a big difference between uppercase and lowercase notary, at least from kind of branding and marketing stuff. And like when he says notary project, for example, here, does that mean we want to rename the organization or the notary project repository? So we need to be much clearer in our, because I think he means the notary project repository, which is the lowercase put together notary project to specifications.
And if there's any feedback, I can act on it. But right now there's no feedback coming in. So that's the other thing. Right? So.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, well, let's, as you said, we have it on the agenda. We are asking specifically the Justin Cormack and Steve to act. I think they are. Did we? Let me I'll just add a comment here and say,
sure.
Okay. Okay. Let's see whether we'll see any activity from their side. The agenda that Feynman added, and he cannot be in the meeting, is these 3 items, actually 4 items. Security page, so we need approval for that. Let me open each one of those. So we need approvals from at least several maintainers. And this is the actual security audit. I don't see a problem actually moving that forward. The actual security audit.
Just to be clear, the security audit is, there's no editing needed on the audit itself, correct? The PDF is going to stay static. It's just a simple hosting of the file, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Simple hosting of the file inside the repository. The third one is the blog post through which I was going through this morning, and Zach, maybe if I can ask you also to take a look at this one, just from language point of view, that will be good.
Yeah, sure.
Yep, I just added you. And the last thing is your secure deployment guide, which actually have that on my list. Yeah, I will review that one. I see that Shiwei have some comments. We need to actually helping Samir and eventually Pritesh, if they can take a look at that.
All feedback has been addressed in this pull request. So there may be some replies and some things I disagree with that may not have been fixed. But to my knowledge, everything has been addressed.
Okay, I'll take a look at that. I will resolve my comments and helping Samir also to look at this. I think the goal. Yeah.
Yeah, if it's an ongoing conversation, if you disagree with like my responses to your comments and you need stuff fixed, like just let me know. I'm happy to have a conversation about that. But I have left responses on any comments that have not been resolved with what I think should be done as an alternative. But to my knowledge, the current state of the security deployment guide should be fine for publishing.
Yeah, and we can always improve that, so we don't need to be perfect the first time. So. Okay, anything else, any other agenda items or anything else folks want to discuss?
I mean, I have the ongoing one about the PR to make me a maintainer for the docs repo. We've got some follow-up comments, no official approvals, just comments saying looks good to me.
Where was that issue? Do you remember the number?
It's in it's actually, I think it's in a different project. I think it's like the Notary project.
Oh,
let me see.
No, it's in the GitHub. Yes. Yep. So we have we have 5, I think, out of
shouldn't we have
created
shouldn't we have created this in the Notary project dev repo issue as just as a PR?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
I don't know why it is created here. We should have actually created this into the Notary project dev.
Right. Yeah. So that those project owners or those repo owners should be able to just approve it without having to go through the .github is more like a TOB almost, right? So
yeah, I don't know why it is created there. I can follow
do you want to just transfer the issue so that we can keep it in that scope? We don't have to worry about
I can actually create a PR directly here for the maintainers and code owners file and just link that issue. Doesn't matter that is in other repo. I'll just create a PR. I don't need to transfer it.
Yeah.
Okay. I can do that.
Thanks, Tori.
Just add to the notes.
I guess the other general question I have, and I don't know if you all know this because none of the engineers are on the call, is the notation CLI finalized for the 1.0 release, or are there still things that are being fixed?
No, there are no development work items. So the code is stable for the 1.0 release. The only thing that we are actually still discussing is the branding and the changes of the spec repository, because we would like to release the spec and the notation CLI at the same time.
Okay, because there is some work that I have to do whenever they cut 1.0 or before, I basically need to generate the new CLI reference for 1.0 and figure out how to handle versioning for that. Because that brings, it's not, I don't think it's something that's blocking the 1.0 release per se, but it's something that I would like to get out pretty quickly around the time 1.0 is out. So if I can start, because right now I don't have my automated PR has not been merged, and we didn't want it merged because I didn't want it to block 1.0 or cause any regressions for 1.0. So I do have to do some manual work. It's not days of work, it's a couple hours. So I can start, I'll start that. And then if there's any branding issues that we have to deal with, you know, then I guess, but you all are comfortable if I gen a new CLI reference, right?
I'm fine with that. Sajay, any concerns with that?
No, sounds good.
Okay, thank you. And I think, yeah, that's it for me.
So Toddy, last item before I drop off. For the GitHub Actions, there was a thread on Slack, but there's also been some comments on the GitHub issue. I think Shuey pointed out CodeQL, and he's not on the call, so I just wanted to call out that the CodeQL repository looks nice, and it's by GitHub also, so it kind of gives, I'm hoping it's a good representation. They use CodeQL-action, and then under that, it's CodeQL-action/init/other steps. So that pattern is also viable, because otherwise for each action, creating a different repository might seem like an overhead, even though sometimes I think it's also a good practice. So I'm kind of in between, but looking at CodeQL, I'm kind of like leaning a little bit more on that simplified model to start with. And then if we really want to split it up down the line in a year, if it gets super complicated, we might have to.
Do you have a link to the CodeQL? In general, I don't mind as long as it is clear that this is a GitHub action. I think that's the thing. So if we have
it's the link is there in the issue. I think Shuey updated the issue. He went hunting for samples.
The issue was in here, right? No, it's not. Yeah, it is here. That sounds good to me. Hey. Yeah, that's a good example. My only thing was because when he proposed that, I went and read this guidance, right?
Right.
And the guidance says, actually not this guidance, this document, this one. And this says each repository must contain a single action. So it seems that GitHub is not very consistent with their guidance.
Yeah, if you click the CodeQL action repository, that has a set of samples in it, and my understanding is that the commits are by GitHub staff. So I'm kind of like looking.
I think that would be actually my preferred way to do it. We can say notation-action, and we can put all the actions in there. What Shuey is proposing, I'm fine with that. As long as
cool.
GitHub doesn't come after us and say, no, you're doing this wrong.
I mean, worst case, we'll have to split up the repo, right? Like it's better. My thinking is let's get unblocked with one repository, and then we can think about.
Okay, I can go and I will create. I'll just comment right now.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you.
Actions, right?
No, just action, because when you type it in the YAML, it'll look like action/init/.
Okay, I will go and create this one right now.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
right, and-
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thanks,
Thank
folks.
you. Bye.
Bye.